medical guidance from the American Medical Association and the American Psychological Association. And in more state news, a U.S. appeals court in Louisiana yesterday ruled against a federal law requiring young adults to be 21 to buy handguns, finding it violated the Second Amendment. The ruling, handed down by a panel of 3 judges on the conservative Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans, comes amid major shifts in the national firearm legal landscape following the landmark U.S. Supreme Court decision that expanded gun rights in 2022. And in weather today in Washington, D.C., it is 49 degrees under light rain. In New York City, it is 41 degrees and hazy. For WPFW News in Washington and WBAI in New York, I'm Sue Goodwin.
We people who are dark up and blue, don't let us hang around this town. What others say come true. We're just good for nothing. They all feel guilty. A boy's grown up mischief. Now we can't hardly stand for that. Or is that real?
All right, let's see if that helps. Hope you can hear me now. Is that better? Hope you great, fantastic, wonderful. Starting off 2025 already. I'm already tired of 2025, folks. I absolutely am. So as I was saying, ever since January 2025, people and the signing of all of these executive orders, people have been pretty much operating in abject chaos, running around basically as if their hair is on fire. Yes, awful things are being done by Trump, particularly in regard to immigration orders. We're going to talk about that a little bit at the end, because that is extremely important. And certainly the way people are responding to the issuing of these executive orders, and not just individual people, but agencies and corporations. And I think it's really interesting that so many people are responding with so much chaos and fear and terror and tears. And these are the same people who knew so much about the democratic process in telling us that, you know, not voting for Democrats is gonna doom us all, but not talking about the Electoral College, not talking about the legislative history of the Democratic Party and these particular candidates that we're talking about in this last election. Specifically, you know, people had seemed to know a lot about the alleged democratic process in this country when they're telling people who they're supposed to or who they shouldn't vote for. But somehow when executive orders are issued, people suddenly don't remember how the system works. So I've been trying to tell people to just calm down, because this is just literally the first few weeks of presidency. And as is what happens with almost every incoming administration, where the president issues a bunch of executive orders, a lot of them end up in court. And end up in court is really not an accurate description of what has happened or what usually happens, because as soon as the orders are signed, or as soon as the advocacy groups hear about the executive orders that will be signed, they immediately file lawsuits. They immediately start drafting the lawsuits so that when the executive order is signed, they immediately dispatch those cases to courts. And that is what has happened with Trump's executive orders. So the disruption that he is causing people with these threats, with these executive orders, is causing folks to make some rash decisions, to really just almost become unhinged, when what I have been saying for the past couple of weeks is that what we should really be doing is taking a breath and seeking out the people who have been telling you since before Obama that organization is the only way we are going to survive now the accelerated decline of this empire. Because I really do believe that is what this situation, this moment in political history is. And I have to tell you, dear listeners, people have not responded to my exhortations to just calm down. These are executive orders. These are not laws. They are already in courts. Calm down. People have not responded to me saying that very well, because obviously people are afraid, and I don't want to dismiss people's fear. The reality of how things work, and I'm not suggesting that the American system in any way whatsoever works as in it is efficient and beneficial to us. No, what I am saying is that the way the system is designed to work, this alleged system of checks and balances and laws and this, that, and the third, well, you can't undo an established law with an executive order. That is, despite how corrupt and questionable, and we can talk about the judicial appointments that came from the first Trump administration and how much impact that will have on some of these lawsuits. Those are valid conversations to have. But I really think we need to start with what executive orders are, what they are not, and why the way we're responding to them is actually giving Trump and his supporters what they want, which is the chaos. So I just happened to come across this post from Judge Kimberly Coroft of Franklin County, Ohio. She has a Facebook account, and she posted on her Facebook account this information about executive orders. I think it's important because she is a judge. And because I am not a judge, I guess people thought I didn't know what the deuce I was talking about. So I'm happy to literally read what Judge Kimberly Coroft of Franklin County, Ohio Court of Common Pleas Division posted on her Facebook page about these executive orders and how they work. She says, and I'm literally reading her post right now. These are not my words. These are the words of Judge Kimberly Coroft. Sorry for mispronouncing her name the last time. Coroft. She says, yesterday I saw a lot of posts on social media regarding the executive order signed by the current president that reversed Executive Order 11246, which was signed by President Lyndon B. Johnson in 1965. So I wanted to provide some context to those conversations. This is Judge Coroft saying this, not Jacqueline Luqman, who is not a judge. Okay. Judge Kimberly Coroft says, number one, executive orders are directives that the chief executive at the state level, governor, or federal level, president, has the authority to sign. Number two, she says, executive orders are not laws. She wrote are not laws in capital letters. She goes on to say they are, at a basic level, documents that capture and convey the executive's policy positions and priorities that agencies and employees working under the authority and administration of the executive must enforce and follow. Number three, she says, this is a sidebar. She literally types hashtag sidebar in number three. When I served as deputy chief counsel, civil division for one of Ohio's governors from 2007 to 2009, my job responsibilities included drafting executive orders for the governor's review, approval, and signature. Those orders were then distributed to Ohio's 26 executive agencies and all state employees. So this is her experience, not just as a judge, knowing and understanding the law, but also in a role that she previously had in actually drafting executive orders. So number four, Judge Cowcroft writes, she says, Executive Order 11246, signed on September 24, 1965, granted the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, or OFCCP, you know how the government loves their acronyms, the authority to require federal contractors to maintain affirmative action plans and prohibited federal contractors from discriminating on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or national origin. Under the order, contractors were also prohibited from discriminating against applicants or employees because they inquire about, discuss, or disclose their compensation or that of others subject to certain limitations. Number five, she writes, on January 22, 2025, an executive order titled Ending Illegal Discrimination and Restoring Merit-Based Opportunity was signed by the current president. This order, Judge Cowcroft says, is intended to revoke Executive Order 11246 and directs federal enforcement agencies to target employers' diversity efforts. Number six, she writes, the order signed on January 22, 2025, also revoked a variety of federal diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, which nobody is talking about, DEIA, and affirmative action federal executive orders and presidential memoranda, including Executive Order 13672 of July 21, 2014, further amendments to Executive Order 11478, Equal Opportunity in the Federal Government, and Executive Order 11246, Equal Employment Opportunity. Then she types, she being Judge Kimberly Cowcroft, types in capital letters after that last executive order, however. Then she goes on to say in number seven, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, signed into law, written in all capital letters, on July 2, 1964, by President Lyndon Johnson, prohibits discrimination in a broad array of private conduct, including public accommodations, governmental services, and education. One section of the act, referred to as Title VII, prohibits employment discrimination based on race, sex, color, religion, and national origin. Yes, there are some things that are left out, and that's a valid whole conversation. But she goes on to say Title VII applies to private employers, labor unions, and employment agencies. The act prohibits discrimination in recruitment, hiring, wages, assignment, promotions, benefits, discipline, discharge, layoffs, and almost every aspect of employment. Judge Cocroft goes on to number 8 and cites the Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1972, signed into law, once again typed in all capital letters, by President Richard Nixon. Might have been the only good thing he did. Amended Title VII to still protect applicants and employees from discrimination in hiring, promotion, discharge, pay, fringe benefits, job training, classification, referral, and other aspect employments. And here we get into the things that were left out before, on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, including pregnancy, or national origin. Judge Kimberly Cocroft goes on to a number 9, where she writes, to the extent that any executive orders signed by a governor are in conflict with state law, or those signed by a president are in conflict with federal law, those orders can be challenged in state or federal court. She goes on to a number 10, where she says, one example of legal challenges to a recently signed executive order by Trump is attorneys general from 22 states. 22 attorneys general filed a lawsuit already regarding the executive order signed by the current president on January 20, 2025, titled Protecting the Meaning and Value of American Citizenship, which attempts to end birthright citizenship, right? People have been talking about this. People have been talking about our indigenous relatives being caught up in this mess because in the ICE raids, because of this particular executive order issued by Trump, the questioning of birthright citizenship with the intention to end it, and what that means for indigenous people, and quite honestly, what that means for us. So she goes on to say, she, again, being Judge Kimberly Cocroft of Ohio, not Jacqueline Luqman, who is not a judge. Judge Kimberly Cocroft said these attorneys general argued that the order is a direct violation of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which guarantees that children born in the United States are citizens, regardless of their parents' immigration status. Once again, she types this next sentence in all caps. This is this is what I said. I'm sorry. I got so carried away. I forgot that I added this. This is why Trump raised revoking the 14th Amendment to overturn birthright citizenship. But here's what we need to understand, which is the part about, which is what I'm talking about when I said a little earlier, I don't understand how we don't understand how things work in regard to laws, executive orders, and just things the president wants to do and threatens to do. You cannot overturn a constitutional amendment by issuing an executive order. You cannot do that. To amend or revoke a constitutional article in the United States, a new amendment has to be proposed by a 2/3 vote in both houses of Congress, and then it has to be ratified by 3/4 of state legislatures or state conventions. And that is actually outlined in the Constitution, in Article 5 of the Constitution. Article 5 of the Constitution literally explains how the Constitution can be amended. And essentially, that means to change part of the Constitution, you need to add a new amendment that modifies it. And this process is very, very difficult to achieve because it's not just a single vote in Congress. You need a supermajority of the states to approve the amendment. And then you need a supermajority in Congress. Okay, key points. Here's some key points about amending the Constitution. An amendment can be proposed by either a 2/3 vote in both houses. That is a supermajority. In both houses of Congress, or by a convention called by 2/3 of state legislatures. Ratification can only happen once an amendment has been proposed in the appropriate fashion. Then the amendment must be ratified by 3/4 3/4 of state legislatures or state conventions to become part of the Constitution. So this is where Judge Kimberly Cowcroft picks up, and that is the end of my commentary, how the Constitution is amended. So Judge Kimberly Cowcroft picks up with her number 11 and says, so to recap, those are her words, not mine, executive orders are not laws. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is a law, which includes Title VII, which is a law, and the Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1972, which is a law, provided necessary amendments to Title VII, are federal laws that are still in effect. And executive orders can be challenged in court to the extent that the orders are in conflict with the law. Again, I must make it clear that I am not saying these things because when I have said these things, people have not received what I have said very well because, I'm not a judge. I don't have those magic letters JD behind my name to give what I say legitimacy. But I figured if I read this post from someone who not only has the JD behind her name, but her little Facebook page has judge in front of her name, and she is a sitting judge in the Ohio Court of Common Pleas, I figure people would probably think she knows what she's talking about better than I do. So there you go. So I am really imploring and begging people to stop panicking over Trump's chaos orders. He knows that he will not win a lot of these battles in court, even if he did appoint a bunch of the judges who may hear some of the challenges. But even with that being true, the fact that he did kind of, appoint a bunch of judges, and I hope I'm going to have time to touch on that a little bit, because I found out something in doing a little bit of reading in preparation for this show that I did not know about the judicial appointments that the last 3 presidents have made in this country. But even with what we think we know about what Trump did in appointing a bunch of federal judges to lifetime appointments on the bench, what I am considering is that just recently, a Trump appointed judge did not sentence the Uhuru 3. Remember, we talked about that case with the FBI during the Biden administration, targeting the members of the African People's Socialist Party chairman Omali Yeshitela and the white allies of the Uhuru movement that are connected with and supportive of that movement. The FBI accused these 3 people of conspiring to be agents of Russia. The FBI raided their properties violently with flashbangs and all of that kind of stuff, seized, confiscated their properties, put them on trial for federal charges of conspiring to be foreign agents for Russia. They received a ridiculous split decision, even though the agent for the federal government, the witness for the federal government, admitted that there was no evidence found in all of the materials they confiscated and poured through. There was no evidence found that gave any credence to the charges whatsoever. Okay, that happened. That they received a split decision, and in their sentencing hearing, the judge wasn't a Trump-appointed judge. And people were expecting this Trump-appointed judge to sentence these folks to at least 3 to 5 years in prison, which was the typical sentence for the one charge they were found guilty of, which was conspiracy to act as foreign agents, even though they were found not guilty of actually acting as foreign agents. Yeah, the split decision made no sense. And the Trump appointed judge actually pointed that out. I don't know how they arrived at that sentence. But then this Trump appointed judge did something that nobody expected him to do, which was not to sentence these people to prison at all. Why? Because the Trump appointed judge said, as much as I do not agree with the things these people say and do, he literally said in his decision, I don't like who they are and what they stand for, I believe they spit on the very flag that gives them this freedom. That this is what the judge said in his sentencing decision. And he went on to say, however, in capital letters, we cannot silence political speech. That is all these people have done. They have engaged in political speech. Now, we don't have to agree with their political speech, but if we silence their political speech because we don't agree, then what we do is we end up creating a chilling effect and silencing all political speech. And in a democracy, we do not do that. That is what a Trump appointed judge decided in the case of the Uhuru 3. And he sentenced them to, I think it was like 300 hours of community service. And that was it. They never saw the inside of a jail. Right. So when I'm saying to people, please don't panic. I'm because these a lot of these executive orders are already being challenged in court. And there are things that people are not quite understanding about cause and effect and correlation and just simple timing that is kind of kismet in the worst kind of way. People are conflating the result of decades of Democrat authoritarianism, there's no other way to say it, and blaming Trump for things that are actually the responsibility of the Democratic Party because of legislation that they championed and put into place years ago. I'll get to that in a minute. But the decision by a Trump appointed judge in the Uhuru 3 case just a few months ago last year is one reason why I'm not entirely convinced that the entire federal bench in this country, across the country, and all the districts are full up with wackadoodle, crazy, unreasonable Trump appointed justices. I'm not saying that these people are not that, but I'm looking at this decision in this case by this Trump appointed judge, and I'm like, I don't know, man. I'm not entirely convinced in the automatic loyalty despite the letter of the law that I think people are expecting from Trump appointed judges, right? I hope that makes sense, because I kind of took that truth into my factoring into how I'm going to respond to the way people are responding. I'm telling you to calm down, because maybe Trump is not maybe, he's definitely not going to be successful in getting some, maybe even a lot of these executive orders actually becoming enshrined into law, because many of them are already being challenged in court. And they are being compared to and analyzed through existing established law, right? Okay. So then now we have to talk about the number of judges we're talking about, right? And this is something that I did not realize myself. And I learned that through just reading up on all of these connected issues for this one particular issue. So people are very convinced, as I was too, that Trump appointed a whole enormous slew of judges to the federal bench that Obama didn't and that Biden didn't. And I remember that being a topic of discussion especially when the Supreme Court justice appointments came around, and we went back to talking about the fact that Obama didn't do what he should have done with the appointment of and Ruth Bader Ginsburg had the attitude she had. That great dude. Okay, we don't need to relitigate that. We know where that was. So here is the truth about the judicial appointments under the three presidents that shocked me. So I'm going to share it with you because I want you to be shocked too. Obama, Trump, and Biden actually appointed around the same number of active federal judges. I did not know it, but this is actually true. Biden appointed 228. Trump appointed 223 in his first term. Obama appointed 226. 228, 223, 226, right around the same number, give or take a few, give or take a handful. Obama and Trump appointed 55 and 43 federal appeals court judges, respectively. Biden appointed 45. Trump appointed 174 federal district court judges to Obama's 268 and Biden's 187. So it appears that Trump did not do this, appoint this massively outsized number of judges to federal benches than Obama did, which people believe, which I absolutely believe, would give him an advantage should anything he does in his next term, which we have arrived at, be challenged in court. According to these numbers, now listen, anything could happen. I have ceased to say definitively this will happen and this will not happen. I've been surprised enough to be humble enough to tell people and to be very comfortable in saying I do not know the future. I do not know everything. I have been wrong on some aspects and some things, and I have been shocked by some of the ways things have. Yep, absolutely. So I am the first person to admit I don't know how these court challenges are going to play out. I would like to believe that the letter of the law, adherence to the letter of the law, will prevail, like, the pleasant surprise that we received from that Trump appointed judge in the Uhuru 3 case. I would like for that to be the standard for how these court challenges play out. Because reality and human nature is what it is, I can't say that. I'm just saying that just gives me an idea that it's possible. It is possible that many of these executive orders will be successfully challenged and they'll be tossed out as they should be, because many of them do violate existing law. But anything can happen, and I'm never not gonna admit that. I don't give predictions. I'm just telling you what the truth is about the actual material conditions that we are facing, right? So the big question, I think, now is, particularly in relation to this executive order with the federal government buyout, so to speak. Trump does not have the authority to do that. Federal employees have a labor contract, their pay scale, their benefits package, all of it is enshrined in law that an executive order cannot overturn. So the question becomes for federal employees who are faced with this crazy, buyout scheme, what should they do? Federal employees, do not rush into accepting that offer, because it is written in invisible ink on water soluble paper. And the minute you find out, after you have signed it and committed to an early retirement buyout, and you find out that you're not going to get that money that man promised you, and you don't get any of your retirement benefits, the tears you will cry will melt that paper away. Do not accept that offer without consulting your union representatives or legal counsel. And federal unions have already come out saying, do not accept that offer. The reality is that offer, if that's what you want to call it, provides little to no benefit for most employees, despite what he promises. The only certain outcome of that plan is that employees who accept it will be signaling to their employer that they're willing to resign from federal service, with no promise of that resignation being accepted, because you can resign from a federal job. They don't have to accept it. That's enshrined in law too. Or there is no promise of any compensation behind what they would normally receive. So there is nothing in that order guaranteeing that you will get the federal benefits that you are entitled to when you actually retire from the federal government. You might get paid through September, and I highly doubt that you will get that, but there is no guarantee that you will get your retirement benefits. federal unions have already come out saying this. Why? Because the executive order is in clear conflict with existing law. It is already facing legal challenges. There are several lawsuits against just that one executive order already. There are multiple lawsuits against a lot more of them. And those who sign on too quickly may find themselves locked into a disadvantageous position with no recourse. Okay, so I really just wanted to provide that information to people and to really just implore people, please calm down. Even in the face of this horrific tragedy that just happened at National Airport. I have never called it that man's name, and I never will. And we're going to talk about that when we come back, but we are a little past 30 minutes past the hour, and that means it is time for a station break. So please, engineer extraordinaire, take it away.
Whether it's the courage to tell the truth about displacement, apartheid, and genocide, or our commitment to presenting jazz and all of its extensions, as well as other liberatory musical forms, blues, hip-hop, house, WPFW has been an unwavering partner in the fight for social justice and the preservation of the culture. Now's the time for you to display your courage and commitment to truly independent press by donating during our Winter Pledge Drive from February 9th through the 22nd. It is with your generous financial support that WPFW, this emancipatory educational media outlet, continues to build a better world, one broadcast at a time.
Thank you so much. And I want to add really quickly that the Black Alliance for Peace Baltimore is also saying, don't panic, join the planning on February 15th at Payne Memorial AME Church, which is at 1714 Madison Avenue in Baltimore. There will be a town hall on domestic open-air prisons, Maryland's internal colonies. Doors open at 12:30. The event is from 1 to 3. Food and child care provided. Masks required. Also, are you following Pan-African Community Action on Instagram? You should be following them on Instagram to get all of their information on their local events here in Washington, D.C. PACA DMV at Instagram. Give them a shout. Thanks so much for hanging out with me this evening. I'm Jackie Lukman. This is Darker Than Blue. And okay, I did say I'm going to talk a little bit about this situation with the horrible airline crash here at National Airport here in Washington, D.C., or DCA, as many people call it. I know that people have been placing this horror at the feet of Trump because of his recent executive order, which, it is true, federal agencies were required to respond to or adhere to. But I submit this. I submit this. At some point, if you believe that the person who is issuing the orders is a fascist, it is your moral responsibility to refuse to follow those orders. What? I don't understand. Did we not listen to anything Dr. King said? Y'all love to quote some Dr. King. People were mad that the inauguration of Donald Trump was on MLK's birthday. Did y'all not hear what that man said? Was his voice not resonating? You are morally obligated to defy immoral orders. So I have never quite understood why, whenever we have seen a president that we don't like issuing executive orders or making laws that we don't like, why we've never questioned why everybody just does what they're told. This is the thing that I've never quite understood. And I don't just mean in the federal agencies, because that's a big question. but also in corporate America. Because did you notice how when all of these executive orders were issued, particularly the ones getting rid of DEI, not only did federal agencies immediately respond and start doing what he said, and I think some agencies went kind of far, but just like in a record time. And you did not see, or maybe you did see, maybe I'm the one who didn't see, maybe I wasn't looking where I should have been looking, because I didn't see any resistance from anybody in any of the federal agencies. I didn't see or hear, except for one lady just a few days ago. And I can't remember her name now, but she was a federal employee and she was like, I'm not doing it. And security came and escorted her out of her office. And she was like, fine, I will die on this hill. This is not right. And I'm not doing it. She is the only figure of opposition within the federal government, among people who make the decisions and have the authority to exercise you understand? There was only one person so far who I have seen openly defy these orders from a so-called fascist. Everybody else in the federal government, they are going along with the fascists. Explain how no one is talking about that. We're all talking about how evil Trump is. We're missing the fact that these are executive orders and not laws, and he cannot overturn established law with an executive order. We've talked about how every 4 years, all of the agencies basically have to wait for a couple of weeks to see what they're going to be focusing on in the next 4 years. And again, I'm just kind of wondering, how is it that the people who know that every 4 years, regardless of who the president is, they have to await their marching orders, when they believe that the person who is the president now is a fascist and he's dangerous to everybody? How come everybody's following the fascist orders and only one? Come on. And why are we not raising that as an issue, not just within the federal government, but also look at all of the corporations that immediately scrapped all of their DEI programs. The executive order was not directed toward private companies, but look at all the private companies that responded to Trump telling the federal government, come on now, y'all. As much as Trump himself is an awful human being, it's absolutely true. I am not sitting here defending Trump, as I have been accused of for about a year now by a few folks. I'm not sitting here just defending Trump. That man he's a mess. That man is a mess. But you dismiss him at your peril. You keep thinking that man is unintelligent, he's stupid, he's crazy. He might not be sophisticated, but he has not survived this long by being an idiot. He has not conned his way to the presidency by being just blatantly stupid. He is crazy, but like a fox. He is craftier than a lot of you are, because you are focusing on him and not questioning the people who have been in these positions in the federal government and in the corporate boardrooms outside of the federal government, who didn't mount any resistance to doing what the crazy man said. You can be a singularly nutty individual and have all kinds of delusions of evil grandeur, but you can only go so far if you don't have anybody who's going to do your bidding. But not just his sycophants, not just his loyal friends who he is giving jobs in the government to, which, by the way, every president has done. Because I also found out today, dear listeners, that Rahm Emanuel has been around far longer than I thought. Rahm Emanuel goes back to Bill Clinton. I did not know this. I just learned this today, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit later on, but you are going to have to go over to Black Liberation Media into the dark room immediately after this show. And what up to all of you who are watching on YouTube right now on Black Liberation Media. Those of you who are listening on WPFW 89.3 FM, did you know you can see me while I'm doing? You can. We can have a great old time in the chat and everything. If you go over to Black Liberation Media on YouTube, 5 o'clock on Fridays. This is where we are. Folks in the chat, they are chatting it up. They've got their side conversations going. You can join in that if you would like to participate in this conversation, because it's just an hour and I've always got a lot to say. So we're going to talk about Rahm Emanuel and Bill Clinton. We're going to talk about Bill Clinton a lot, because when it comes to this issue of immigration, Trump, this is not Trump. What we're seeing with the situation with immigration and the ICE raids, and, an executive order should not have triggered that kind of activity. Because again, an executive order cannot overturn established law. So then I started thinking to myself, so then if they're doing this on just an executive order, what the devil is the established law on immigration? And I found out that the established law on immigration is actually not far from exactly what we're seeing now. And that law was passed by Bill Clinton. That and some others that laid the groundwork is the foundation for the current situation regarding immigration today. We're going to get into that in a few minutes over in the dark room after this show. But for right now, let's talk about this situation with this horrible plane crash. 65 plus people died, no survivors from either craft. People who don't live in Washington, D.C. do not know that Washington, D.C., like everywhere else in this country, is saturated with military bases. There are 2 military bases closer to me than the White House is, than the Capitol is. I live in Washington, D.C., and I can go to almost any high elevated hill in this neighborhood where I live, and I can see the Capitol complex, the White House, the Capitol, I can see them all. And I can point out where the Pentagon is, and Fort McNair, and Bolling Air Force Base, and Andrews Air Force Base, and the Coast Guard headquarters. And there are military aircraft in the air in DC all of the time. And that has been an issue forever in this region. Who is controlling the military aircraft, which is now people are realizing, oh, that's a problem. Because nobody is telling the military aircraft, you need to stay away from the airspace around the commercial airports. No, the military aircraft fly wherever the heck they want, because they're allegedly surveilling and protecting the Capitol building, the White House, the houses, the different offices connected to the Capitol, the Hart Senate office, but all of the office, but right. Yeah, they're trolling the skies, patrolling, keeping the building safe, but they've been causing chaos for DCA and the pilots and the airport authority at DCA for decades. That's been a problem for decades. But the other thing that has contributed to this horrible, horrible crash has not been Trump's executive order that caused or created the removal of a few people at the top levels at the FAA. That's not those people being removed from their jobs, the so-called DEI hires. Those people's removal did not have any impact on this crash. What did impact this crash was, since President Jimmy Carter and President Ronald Reagan destroyed the Patco union, there has been a shortage of air traffic controllers. That's been a problem since, do you remember the Patco strike? Decades ago, I remember, and I remember the Patco strike because I was watching the news as I did when I was a kid. My mom thought it was very weird. I loved it when C-SPAN, I was there when C-SPAN was launched, and I thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. So in what I don't know, was I middle school, first couple of years of high school, I am sitting at home watching C-SPAN instead of going outside and going to parties. And I'm watching PBS and the McNeil Lehrer News Hour. Ooh, I love that stuff. And Petey Green's Washington. Oh, I loved it. So, my mom, she just stopped worrying about me and just, she sat down and watched with me just to make sure I wasn't coming up with some weirdo plans in my head, I guess. But I remember watching the news coverage about the air traffic controllers going on strike. And I remember it because I did not know that a large percentage of the air traffic controllers were Black and were women. I had no idea until I'm watching the coverage of this strike. And I see all of these people who are the air traffic controllers, who are the ones who are in the tower talking to the pilots, giving them the instructions they need to land and take off safely. And that kind. I didn't know it was a lot of us. And I was like, I was immediately like, Mom, I didn't know that we could do that. You know what I mean? I'm looking at the news and I'm like, Mom, I didn't know we had those jobs. You want to talk about Black jobs? Air traffic control was Black jobs at one time until the Patco strike. And the Patco strike is always laid at the feet of Ronald Reagan. But the plan, the task force to harass the workers before they voted to go on strike and to replace the striking workers, to recruit and replace the striking workers, was actually a task force and a plan that was hatched by Jimmy Carter. Because the negotiations began under the Carter administration, and Carter did not like unions. I don't care how much y'all love your good Christian Jimmy Carter. And I say this as a believer myself. I understand how much y'all love him. You think he was a saint because he built houses after his presidency. He was just as anti-worker and just as much of a bloodthirsty imperialist as the rest of them were. Jimmy Carter's plan with his task force was what Ronald Reagan used to break the Patco strike. Ronald Reagan didn't come up with that idea himself. I'm not saying he wouldn't have done it. It's just that Jimmy Carter handed them the blueprint, the plans, the mechanism, the infrastructure to do it more easily. So when we are talking about the things that contributed to this crash, as much as the removal of the high-level FAA people under this ridiculous racist attack on DEI is bad, and it's a problem, and it's awful, and it's illegal, probably illegal. And it is absolutely exposing. I don't know who needed it to be exposed, but it's clear that Trump is a bigot, because every time he and anybody in his administration says, well, this happened because of DEI, they're really saying the word that we cannot say that begins with an N. You know that, right? That's what DEI is, their way of, just like CRT is their way of saying that word without saying it. Woke ideology is their way of saying that word. Well, we understand that. Yes, these people are absolutely evil, racist, sexist bigots for this executive order attacking DEI. But the removal of those people from the FAA is not what contributed to this plane crash. I wish it were. I would love for this to be the thing that everybody turns on Trump. I would love it, but I cannot, if I value the truth, and I do, I cannot lay this at his feet. This is absolutely the end result of neoliberal policies in deregulation and privatization, because PATCO as a union doesn't exist anymore because of what Carter and Reagan did. So the federal employees, well, the air traffic controllers that were hired to replace the members of the PATCO union, yeah, they don't belong to a union that's outside of, I think, the federal union. And we all know that it is illegal for federal employees to go on strike, which is, that's an anti-worker policy all by itself, right? So I am, and again, I am not saying that Trump is a good guy and this is, no, give it a minute. He's going to do and say something else horrific. Yes, he is. But if the truth means anything, we cannot lay responsibility at Trump's feet for this crash, because this crash happened because of policies that were enacted and carried out by a Democrat and a Republican. And if we want to be really, really clear, and I'm going to have to end on this, just last year, Congress approved an increase in flight traffic out of DCA over the objections of the DCA Airport Authority, pilots who have to fly in and out of that joint, and even members of Congress. Tim Kaine and a bunch of others issued public statements last year condemning the decision made by Congress under the Biden administration to increase flights out of DCA. There were, and just real quick, senators from Virginia and Maryland spoke out against the proposals included in the Federal Aviation Administration Reauthorization Act, which was approved by Congress in 2024. Let's see, really quickly, the bill received overwhelming bipartisan support. It first cleared the House in July 2023 by a vote of 351 to 69. The Senate passed the bill with some amendments by a vote of 88 to 4 in May 2024. The House then approved the amended bill last May by 387 to 26 before it was approved by the upper chamber. Democratic Senators Mark R. Warner and Tim Kaine of Virginia and Ben Cardin and Chris Van Hollen of Maryland issued a joint statement condemning an addition to the FAA Reauthorization Act that would allow 5 incoming and 5 outgoing flights at National Airport. The senator said the increase in flights would overburden the already congested main runway and, quote, increase the risk of a serious accident there, end quote. Kaine also warned of the potential for collisions if more flights were approved for the busy airport while speaking to reporters last year. He said, quote, God forbid waking up and looking in a mirror one day and saying, wow, I was warned, and I shouldn't have done this, end quote. That is what Tim Kaine said, and that's reported by Newsweek. If you want to get the full list of lawmakers who voted to increase the flights at Reagan Airport, you go to that article at Newsweek. The article is called Full List of Lawmakers Who Voted to Increase Flights at Reagan Airport, and find out whose responsibility this really is. I would love for it to be Trump's. It's really not. We are never going to get any of this right. We're never going to fix it if we don't admit who is really responsible for setting us up this way. But I'm out of time for this week. Thank you so much for joining me on Darker Than Blue here on WPFW 89.3. You all on Black Liberation Media. Stay tuned for the Dark Room. The rest of you, luta continua. The struggle continues. But if we keep fighting, I promise you, Victoria Acerta, victory is certain. Peace. Woo-wee. Okay, let's see. Let me get that one. Okay. Hey y'all. So let me do my there we go. Boom. You got a nice little look at that. Look at that. You got a nice little card and everything. Nice little promo. I cooked one up for you. And then, you know, I almost forgot to put it on. Then welcome to the dark room, where it's much darker than blue in here. God. I hope you have your libations. I have mine. Thank you very much for this lovely mead drink. I think I'm digging mead. I'm really digging mead. Thank you for bringing it to me. You know who you are, my sis in love. Thank you so much. Between her and her mama, I might gain some of that weight back, because man, maybe he's spoiling me. But anyway, let's get into it. Because I have had a time this week. And then I kind of realized that I've been having a time with folks underestimating me for a minute. And that does kind of get under my skin. It's not that I have an ego. I just hate people thinking I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about just because I don't have some letters behind my name. I hate that. I hate it. If you disagree with me, cool. But stop thinking I don't know what I'm talking about just because I ain't graduated from nobody's college. I know what I know, and you can't take that from me. But I don't mind proving people wrong. So let's do it. Let's get into it. Let's continue talking about Bill Clinton, shall we? Good grief, that is good. Well, you know, look, you can still think it's too early to speak about anybody's role, but the history is what it is. The facts are what they are. I don't know how much easy, I don't know how else we're supposed to say that. Like those people who were escorted out of those jobs at the FAA, they did not have anything to do. Do we know where the FAA is? I think this is a key thing. I think this is a key thing. People who don't live in Washington, D.C. don't know shit about Washington, D.C. First of all, you don't know how small Washington, D.C. is. Like people who don't live here do not understand how small this city is. Like people who visit, they're like, oh, the Capitol is right there and the White House is right. And everybody just kind of lives around. Yeah. So people don't have a realization or an understanding of the physical context of the way things exist, where they exist. The FAA is housed in a building that is nowhere near the airport, right? So everybody working at the FAA, they are not anywhere near anybody's airport. And as a matter of fact, let me hold on. FAA headquarters. Let me see if they will give me. Yeah, there we go. The address. I know where the FAA building is. I just always forget the address. The FAA national headquarters is on Independence Avenue in Washington, D.C. The airport is not on Independence Avenue. Airport is not near Independence Avenue. So the people who were released from their jobs at the FAA, if I'm understanding correctly, these were not air traffic controllers. These were kind of high-level people who worked at the FAA headquarters. They did not work at DCA. The air traffic controllers at DCA have experienced a shortage in air traffic controllers in the number of people needed to do that job ever since Carter and Reagan destroyed the PATCO union. That has been a reality ever since, because the federal government under every administration has refused to they have refused to return staffing of the air traffic controllers to pre-strike levels. That was always the point, the privatization of the job. So That is, and this is what I didn't have time to read in the show we just ended, and I'm going to share this with you so you can see, so you understand that I am not just making stuff up. This is record show pilots have complained for 20 years about what? Near misses at DCA. Let me do a little bit bigger so you can read it, because I don't, you know me, I don't like to just read I do that for the radio because they can't see, right? But I want you to read along. This is from, as you can see, NBC5 in Chicago. They say that they found at least 16 complaints in NASA's aviation safety reporting system dating back to 2006, where pilots reference near misses with helicopters or other aircraft while approaching DCA. For at least 2 decades, pilots have complained about near misses with helicopters and other aircraft in the congested airspace above National Airport. According to their investigation, the complaints are not necessarily investigated or corroborated by the federal aviation authorities. I mean, Jesus Christ. I mean, I'm sorry, yo. How do you have a pilot complaining, I nearly flew into a fucking helicopter, and not investigate that? Okay, but do underscore concerns raised by the pilots themselves about airspace congestion. Now, I understand not paying any attention to what politicians say, because they lie all the time. And you do have to be very careful about when you agree with them and prop them up and when you don't. But the person flying the plane, I kind of tend to believe them when they say we have a problem, not knowing when there is a military aircraft in the vicinity that is going to interfere with our ability to either take off and land safely. That has been a problem for years. But do underscore concerns raised by pilots themselves about airspace congestion at one of the nation's busiest commercial runways. According to authorities, 67 people died Wednesday when a Black Hawk helicopter collided with a regional American Airlines jet. That is what happened, because I've seen people say the airplane collided with it. No, the airplane was exactly where it was supposed to be, on a commercial air runway. The Black Hawk helicopter was where it had no business being. But again, I wish I could tell you who controls or manages military aircraft, but I can't tell you that because nobody seems to know, because the Pentagon ain't saying shit, right? So according to the authorities, the helicopter collided with the American Airlines jet over the Potomac River as the jet made its final approach, meaning it was literally a few hundred feet off the ground, and the helicopter was flying that low. It had no business. The cause of the midair collision remains under investigation by the Federal Aviation Administration and the National Transportation Safety Board. The collision marked the deadliest commercial airline crash in the U.S. in more than 20 years and has quickly renewed national conversations about aviation safety. The investigation found at least 16 complaints in NASA's aviation safety reporting system. I also didn't know that NASA housed this aviation incident reporting system. That's interesting. Dating back to 2006, where pilots reference near misses with helicopters or other aircraft while approaching National Airport. The figures could be an undercount. 16 is, I guarantee you, not as many as there actually have been, given that pilots submit their experiences to the NASA data set voluntarily. Their identities were removed. In 2006, a pilot wrote that they had to make a missed approach after the air traffic control tower alerted them of a military helicopter over the river, adding, "Why does the tower allow such nonsense by the military in such a critical area?" In 2013, another pilot described another near miss when a helicopter, writing, there are always numerous military and government helicopters running up and down that river at all times of day at night. He ain't never lied. Well, they ain't never lied, because I don't know if the pilot is male or female. He later wrote that the helicopter passed 200 feet below us. Now, you being 200 feet from me, that's a lot. But a helicopter being 200 feet from a plane is not. And that the air traffic control tower never called out the traffic beyond the first notification. The same pilot wrote that when he pressed the controller in charge at the tower, he admitted that it was a military helicopter flying from or to Fort Meade, and that he was flying a little higher than normal. The pilot went on to write, "I cannot imagine what business is so pressing that these helicopters are allowed to cross the path of airliners carrying hundreds of people! Exclamation point! I do not understand why they are not crossed in between arrivals." In 2015, a pilot filed a complaint about having to land on runway 33, the very runway the American Airlines flight was attempting to land on before Wednesday's mid-air collision. In this complaint, the pilot wrote that he came within very close contact of another aircraft, adding there was an extreme lack of communication between DCA Tower to our flight or DCA Tower to the associated helicopter. That is very important, because I am not sure what the communication protocol between DCA Tower, which is the tower that controls and communicates with commercial airlines, I don't know what their protocol is for communicating with military aircraft. I can't tell you if that protocol is different. I don't know. And because we don't know, I think that's a problem. But let me continue. And last April, another pilot wrote he did not see a helicopter that was 300 feet below us, adding, "We never received a warning of the traffic from air control, so we were unaware it was there." Now, a source told NBC News that staffing in the DC Tower on Wednesday was not normal for the amount of traffic and time of day. According to a preliminary FAA safety report on the collision, the same source says that the DC Tower usually has a controller who focuses on helicopter traffic, but FAA's guidelines allow for that position to be combined with another controller, which is reportedly what happened at the time of the crash. Now, those guidelines, the FAA guidelines that allow for this type of thing, let me see if I can, there we go. The FAA guidelines that allow for combining these two positions was not written by Trump. The executive order had no bearing on them combining these two positions. That is something the FAA has in its guidelines, and it has had it in its guidelines long before Trump became president and issued the executive order. So, barring something saying the report, I don't know what it has to say for people to understand that this crash did not happen because anybody at the FAA headquarters was removed from their jobs because of DEI. This happened because of liberal neoliberalism facilitating the privatization schemes of conservatives, deregulation, austerity, and people ignoring liberal fascism, basically, and then trying to conveniently place it at the feet of the guy that the very people who have ignored the facts that Democrats allowed this type of situation to persist and deteriorate, and they went on to make it worse, are now turning around and tell us, "Ooh, this is Orange Man's fault, bad." And people are going right along with it, completely ignoring that, as much as it pains me to say it, Trump didn't do this. Democrats did. They really did. But so have Republicans the entire time since Carter and Reagan destroyed Patco. And Democrats have never done anything to rescind the legislation that came from that. They didn't know. They, like I said, they haven't returned staffing to pre-Patco strike destruction levels. They haven't said anything to the FAA about their policy of combining two critical positions into one. Why would the FAA do that? Why would the big dogs, why would the big wigs at the FAA do that? Tammy Duckworth said their flight path should have been hugging the east bank of the Potomac River, so their flight should not have been in the path of that landing aircraft, said U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth, Democrat from Illinois. Duckworth, a former military pilot who has flown Black Hawk helicopters before, told reporters that she was briefed by both the FAA and the NTSB early Thursday. She said the helicopter was made aware of the regional commercial jet and was told to go behind it. It was not immediately clear what led to the midair. They're literally telling you what led to the midair collision and then turning around and saying it's not clear what led to the midair because, lawsuits and whatnot. The Illinois U.S. Senator who sits on the aviation subcommittee told NBC5 Investigates that she has concerns about the previous complaints they referenced, adding, it's something lawmakers will look into that. She said, we'll be looking at that. Near misses is a misnomer. We should be calling them near collisions. And this is happening across the country. She added, that lawmakers were also discussing additional, they love their training. I can't, oh, Jesus, fuck that. No more on training. So this is what Tammy Duckworth said. And I am just curious. You know what I'm curious about. You know what I'm curious about. Where is it? Oh, let's see. Let me make sure. Let me sure I got this right. Okay. Now I'm going to share this one. Tammy Duckworth said the things. Oh, we're going to look into this. Well, we should be calling these near collisions. Oh, we should be investigating. Oh, I'm so surprised about these complaints that you brought up. Oh, yeah? She was one of the ones who voted to increase the flights out of DCA. That's her name. Isn't that her name? Ain't that her name right there? Ain't that Tammy Duckworth, Democrat from Illinois? Let me make sure this is the right list and not the one that voted against. Hold on. Ooh, man. There it is. Lawmakers who voted to increase flights at National Airport. This is the House of Representatives members who voted to increase those flights in May of 2024. Look at all those Democrats and Republicans. And then we go down. This is the House vote in May when the bill was initially introduced. And we go all the way down past all of these people who voted in the House for the increase in flights. And these are all of the senators who voted in May to increase the flights. And look whose name is on the list. So she's talking about she didn't know about the complaints. Bullshit. Because at least three of her colleagues openly complained about this situation. Get the fuck. Now, I'm going to drop these articles. There you go. Oh, shoot. I already closed that other article. Sorry. I'll get it back for you. Here's the article with the list of lawmakers in it. Let me get the article. What's the other one? Oh, shoot. I don't know what happened to it now. I got to find it. I'll dig it up in my history. I'll put it in from my history. I'll put it in the description later on. So when it comes to this crash, I understand the timing is just perfect, right? This horrible crash happens literally days after Trump issues an executive order that uh, 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 does away with DEI efforts and all of these federal employees that are allegedly DEI hires. Like okay, they're fired, they're escorted out, or however you want to frame it. So it looks like the crash is a result of the. It's not. It is not. And I don't know how else to say that. I don't want to say it's not his fault. I want everything to be Trump's fault, because that would just really, it would just be easier right now, because the situation we are faced with is we're having to do exactly this. We're having to explain to people over and over again for the 111th time, for the 511th time, that Trump could not do all that he is doing if there were not already an infrastructure to facilitate this being done, because he couldn't have passed all of the legislation to do all of these things. Do these things just happen just like that if this infrastructure wasn't already in place? And then the question has to be, who put the infrastructure in place? Whose playbook is he following? Because he didn't come up with this. When we're talking about the immigration stuff now, we're going to pivot to just the horrible ICE raids and all of this, the indigenous people now being scooped up in the house in the ICE raids. Then we got these ADOS FBA niggas calling ICE on people. You fucking clown ass traitor ass. And people like, oh, Trump's immigration. Oh. I hate to bust your bubble. I'm so sorry. What Trump is doing right now is terrible, awful, inhumane, evil, absolutely repulsive and repugnant. But did you know that the legal framework that allows him to do what he is doing came from Bill Clinton? Because what Trump is doing right now through immigration, Clinton actually passed the policies that make it legal for him to do it. I know you don't believe me. So, oh, this is already open. So let me do this. Because see, I do listen to people when I do listen to y'all when you make suggestions. You know, when you say things in the chat, and I'm like I would love to see you do this, that, and the third, Jackie. Okay, I do. I take your suggestions. So when Erica Ryan, my comrade and my sister, said the 90s is a deeply unstudied period of time, and the third time she said it, I was like, you know what? She's right. Let me see what she means. So, of course, when the ICE agents go out, all excited, as soon as that executive order is signed, the ink wasn't even dry on that joint. Them motherfuckers was like, mount up. They was putting on all the 1033 equipment, hopping in their little ICE vans and going out to the Black and brown neighborhoods and rounding folks up. How were they able to do that so easily? Hello, Kimathi. He's putting his paw on my leg because he's like, Mommy, you are talking, but you are not talking to me, and this is a problem. So, hello, Kimathi. There we go. All right, so that's out of the way. How did ICE move so slowly? So smoothly? How did the executive order signed, and these people they didn't even have to craft a plan. They were just like, it's Tuesday, let's go. How? Well, let me tell you how. Excuse me. Here we go. Now, I want to note that this article is from March 2017. So this was during Trump's first administration. And here I must remind people that we had all of these conversations the first time around. We did. We had all these conversations with folks the first time around with the Trump derangement syndrome. I hate to repeat the little whatchamacall that the conservatives, that the Freedom Caucus freaks came up with, but it was kind of true the way people were being unhinged about how uniquely evil Trump is. And I'm sitting there with my 50 plus something year old self, and Abdus with his 50 something plus year. We're like, these niggas weren't alive during Bill Clinton? Shit. Like, and this is why we had this conversation with people. Because Bill Clinton was the right-wing Democrat that the Democratic Leadership Committee propped up using this new third way strategy where the Democratic Party intentionally abandoned their focus on racial, social, and gender justice issues, that, you know, the things that they were supposed to be the party that they represented the people for, and decided it was a strategic decision that they made to not talk about Black folks, not talk about Indigenous folks, not talk about queer folks, not talk about gender discrimination, not talk about women's rights anymore, and to talk about economic issues, to talk about crime, to talk about immigration. Why? To appeal to moderate right-wing voters. Democrats wanted the Reagan Democrats. Well, actually, the DLC is where the Reagan Democrats came from. Democrats wanted to siphon off the Reagan coalition, because white people love themselves some Ronald Reagan in this country for obvious reasons. But Bill Clinton was, I wouldn't call him the first right-wing Democrat, because I swear to God, that was Jimmy Carter's in my lifetime, right? But Bill Clinton, let's talk about what Bill Clinton did. I'm going to scroll down this article a little bit. And I actually did pull out some sections where I'm reading from a little transcript that I have here on the side. So what we want to point out in this article, first, I want to start with the very top. Men make their own history, this article says, but they do not make it as they please. They do not make it under self-selected circumstances, but under circumstances existing already, given and transmitted from the past. The tradition of all dead generations weighs like a nightmare on the brains of the living. Oh, that dude y'all liberals hate, Karl Marx. Big Daddy Karl. The most cruel, divisive, and dangerous policies adopted thus far by the administration of President Donald John Trump, remember, this is the first one, are those embodied in the executive orders. We've been here before, y'all, been here. He has signed into law in the areas of immigration, terrorism, and border security. They're so cruel indeed that many influential commentators have fostered the narrative that they are unprecedented. And we're hearing that bullshit again. And it's not true. Why? In both the larger historical context and the smaller scope of the recent past, they fall well within the boundaries of America's deep-seated nativist traditions. Trump isn't the first chief executive to tap into those traditions. His policies haven't sprung from thin air, from the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798 to the Chinese Expulsion Act of 1882, the Red Scares of the 20th century in which we were the main targets, and the communists and the leftists and the labor organizers and socialists. The Operation Wetback mass deportations of the Eisenhower administration, and the deportation record set by President Obama. Our immigration laws and policies, in good measure, have been driven by political expediency, paranoia, and scapegoating, racism, and economic exploitation. But while Trump's programs fit nicely into the broad sweep of our nativist legacy, they also owe a specific debt to legislation enacted during the tenure of none other than President William Jefferson Clinton. You read that right. Much that is repugnant and regressive in Trump's executive orders, this was from the first administration, and this applies to this one, the ballyhooed southern wall, the expansion of the border patrol, the mass detentions and expedited removals of the undocumented and criminal aliens, the deployment of local police to enforce immigration laws, even the violation of international standards governing the treatment of refugees, him sending Colombians back in a military plane handcuffed. He did that shit before. Can be traced back to the statutory framework constructed during the Clinton era. The great triangulator, that's literally what they call that nigga, didn't just fuel an already existing trend toward mass incarceration with the enactment of the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994, or otherwise known as the 94 Crime Bill, or add to the miseries of the poor by upending the welfare system with the passage of the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act of 1996. Yes, it was Bill Clinton and not Republicans that destroyed welfare in this country as we know it and created the shit that exists today. He also left a stain in the field of immigration. All right, I'm going to drop this article in the chat for you, and so you can read it yourself, and I'm just going to go over some highlights. Woo, it's hot in here because I made the mistake of turning the heat up for like 1 degree. And that compressor is like, let me remind you why you get me serviced every year. So here we are. I hope you got the article. So let's get into the legislation that we're talking about here that Bill Clinton passed. Because in this article, the author says that Clinton, in his 1996 State of the Union address, stressed the need for tough federal action on illegal immigration. He said, after years of neglect, literally his words, so I should have started by saying, quote, after years of neglect, this administration has taken a strong stand to stiffen the protection of our borders. This is Bill Clinton now. We are increasing border patrols by 50%. We are increasing inspections to prevent the hiring of illegal immigrants. And tonight, I announce I will sign an executive order to deny federal contracts to businesses that hire illegal immigrants. In short order, he went far beyond the hiring ban. He signed into law 2 pieces of omnibus legislation that paved the way for Trump's current, now this was in the first administration, and this is true today, nativist agenda. Those 2 pieces of legislation were the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, enacted in April 1996, and the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, or IRA is what people call it, which was passed in September of the same year. These 2 acts, along with a few other smaller pieces of legislation, combined to lay the foundation for the current policies and human rights violations we're seeing Trump use today. No Democrat administration has ever repealed, or I don't even think attempted to repeal, much of the framework that Bill Clinton laid that's still being used today of any of these horrible laws. Even when we crazy, pesky leftists kept protesting the Democrats, Obama, Biden, over their horrible immigration policies that they also used this legislation to carry out. And they deported more people than Trump did in his first term. Now, of course, Trump is going to try to surpass those astronomical numbers, but can we please stop acting like Trump is the mastermind of this xenophobic evil? Because he's not. As much as he is a swaggering carnival barker, reality show braggart, and bigot, He is not the author of this chaos, even though he is everyone's target. But the real target should be Bill Clinton and the Democrats. Y'all know he's still alive, right? Bill Clinton is responsible for this mess. The Democrats are responsible for this mess. They are the ones who should own this. Because had they not passed this legislation, had the DLC not abandoned working class and poor Black folks, had they not abandoned civil rights, had they not abandoned women's rights, had they not abandoned gender equality in all of its iterations, had they not abandoned rights for the disabled. Yeah, they threw the disabled off the bus too. And had they not decided to appeal to the Republicans with the tough on crime, tough on immigration, liberty focused platform, we wouldn't be here. I don't think we would be here. Would we have eventually gotten here? Maybe, probably, but not now, because somebody else would have had to have built this. But Democrats did, and they continue to stay committed to it. Everyone wants to make everything Trump's fault. Yes, he's an asshole. He's a bigot. He's a racist. He's a sexist. He's all of the things. He's all of those things. But he is not the orchestrator of this. He is simply using the framework that has existed and has been used by every other president before him to do the exact same thing. He's just taken the ceremony away from it. He's just taken the veneer of civility and adherence to law away from it. He's just like, no, fuck them immigrants. It's just that Obama and Biden were also saying fuck them immigrants. They just, put a hashtag BLM and hashtag rainbow flag and that's, but they were saying fuck them immigrants too, because that's literally what they did. They deported millions more people than Trump did. Okay. So I get people's fear of Trump. Well, I get it. But we do not understand what it is we are really afraid of. What you're really afraid of is how this duopoly works. One party can't get away with the other party doesn't facilitate it being able to do. If there is actually an opposition party, wouldn't they actually be opposing the legislation that the other guys who are supposed to be the evil, monstrous, baby-eating fascists, and I'm not saying that they aren't. I'm just saying they're not the only ones. Like, that's the thing. I'm not at all saying that Trump and the Republicans are not as evil as people believe they. Yeah, sure they are. Always been, though. Well, maybe not always, because there was the whole Southern strategy and the switch from the parties where all of the Southern Democrats who were racist and hated white people left the Democratic Party after the 1964 Democratic Convention, when the Civil Rights Act was introduced as a major plank of the Democratic Party platform, and the Southern Democrats was like, fuck them niggas, and they all left the Democratic Party and joined the Republican Party. And that's when the parties switched. I like doing that. That was funny, because I always say that to people. That's just like, come on, can we stop pretending like, number one, it didn't happen, because it absolutely did happen. And can we stop throwing in a whole bunch of other, the summer, it was the economy, and no, it was the Negroes. It was the Negroes. And the Southern Democrats were literally like, fuck them niggas. And you nigga lover. And they left the Democratic Party and became Republicans. So when Republicans tell you today that, Republicans were the party of Lincoln, and throw that shit out the window, because we understand that Lincoln didn't free nobody. Our ancestors freed themselves by making the institution untenable. We freed ourselves by making it too big of a headache to keep us as slaves. Oh, you want to keep us as slaves? Keep being afraid of which meal is going to contain the ground up glass, motherfucker. Oh, we gonna have a revolution and a liberation struggle on the German coast in New Orleans and march on New Orleans. We're gonna chant like the Patriots did. Give us freedom or death, give us liberty or death, and you motherfuckers killed us and put our heads on stakes. And you thought our response to that was gonna be, yes, sir. Yes, sir. We sorry, sir. We sorry. No, we still fought. And we fought until we made the institution of slavery economically and politically untenable for the slave owners. That is what broke the back of enslavement in this country, not Lincoln and his bullshit proclamation that actually did not free all of the enslaved people. Because Lincoln says in the Emancipation Proclamation, and you would know this if you watched my History Rewind series on my Patreon. You should do that, patreon.com/LukeMonNation. The Emancipation Proclamation specifically did not apply to states that were not, how is it written in the proclamation? Were not, what was it, that were loyal to the Union, basically that didn't secede. Slave states that did not secede with the South, which would have been what, Maryland, Delaware, I can't remember, was it Missouri? I think one of the other non-Southern states that were slave states at the time. The Emancipation Proclamation literally says this document does not apply to those states. So y'all can keep y'all niggas. Y'all can keep y'all slave. That's literally what it says. So don't you ever tell me that Abraham Lincoln freed no damn slaves. And the next time a Republican tells you this shit, oh, the Republicans were the party of Lincoln, you tell them this. And you tell them you can take your Lincoln and your party and you know where to go with it and what to do with it. But we're not talking about them right now. So Democrats were responsible for this infrastructure of violating the human rights of people who are considered illegal immigrants. And we have had to argue with people, liberals, who, this is the second time now. This is the second time now that we've had to deal with this whole, well, this is what's wrong with you leftists and you communists because you all have a purity test. And see what your purity test got? Your purity test got us Trump. If purity test means truth, yep, I got one. I absolutely have a purity test. I don't vote for people who I know are liars. And I'm not going to sit here and continue to argue with people who do not care about the truth. You tell that we told people the truth about Clinton and the immigration policies and Trump only doing what Democrats have done before him. And what we got was the same thing people are saying now. Well, Trump did. I don't give a shit. If Bill Clinton had not done this, Trump would not have been able to do this. So let's talk about what this legislation did. One part of the legislation that Clinton passed, and I think it is, now this is the one more, I'm going to be fair. Clinton didn't write this legislation. It was a Republican piece of legislation. But Clinton didn't oppose this shit either. He did not oppose it. He didn't fight against it. Democrats were like, well, politically, we really can't be seen as being weak on immigration. That's what they said. That is why they did not oppose it. Yeah, they tried to negotiate a few things to be less overtly hateful and probably immediately bloodthirsty and deadly as the Republicans wanted, but they didn't fight this thing because for them, it would have cost votes of the moderate Republicans that they didn't give a shit about the cost to the targets of the legislation. So this is what pieces of this legislation that Clinton passed and the Democrats have been carrying out all this time. this is what some of it does. So prior to 1996, immigrants were subject to deportation following state or federal convictions of very serious crimes like murder or rape or, something serious on that level. The AEDPA added 17 aggravated felonies to the list, much lesser charges like theft, counterfeiting, and receiving stolen property in cases involving terms of imprisonment or 5 years or more. Under the IRA law, the term of imprisonment needed to render theft and forgery offenses as grounds for deportation was reduced to 1 year. So all people had to, in order for people to be deported, if they were committed of stealing a loaf of bread from 7-Eleven, and if they were going to be charged a year for that crime, that's an immediate deportation, as opposed to before when somebody had to literally kill a person in order to be. The net effect of the changes, because people are always talking about, the surge of the immigrants at the border. This is why we have to do. Well, the border wasn't that big of an issue before this legislation. The net effect of the changes was to vastly expand the number of immigrants, both documented and undocumented, subject to removal from the country. Gee, why would a politician do such a thing? Trump's executive orders build on the AEDPA and IRA, what weird acronyms, by targeting for removal undocumented immigrants either convicted of or simply charged with any criminal offenses. Along with broadening the definition of deportable crimes, the 1996 acts called for the mandatory detention of immigrants convicted of aggravated felonies pending their removal. As a result, the average daily number of immigrants held in detention centers skyrocketed from 6,785 in 1994 to 19,458 by the time Clinton left office. And here is the answer to the question I just asked, but you already knew it. Many were held in private, for-profit facilities. These pieces of legislation also ended traditional deportation hearings. I remember specifically having interviews with an immigration attorney, which, you know what? Anyway, having interviews with an immigration attorney on By Any Means Necessary repeatedly, especially during Trump's where it was just like, what is going on? And it was never brought up that the fast tracking of deportations past the immigration hearings, it really wasn't a topic of discussion because we didn't really know. We're relying on him as an immigration attorney and who we think is a leftist to tell us, hey, this is not new. But it's not. The lack of deportation hearings and administrative judges to hear people's asylum claims, this is not new. The laws Bill Clinton signed did away with traditional deportation hearings, replacing them with removal hearings. And this was not just a change in words. Along with the revised name under the new law, immigrants were allowed fewer procedural rights. Among other changes, the IRA eliminated an often invoked defense known as suspension of deportation, which permitted immigrants to seek deportation relief if they had been physically present in the U.S. for at least 7 years. I remember hearing that you had to be in the U.S. for at least 7 years and hadn't committed a crime and demonstrated that you had put down roots, had a job, and you were a part of the American fabric. And if you were deported, you and your family would suffer extreme hardship. IRA, that Bill Clinton's law, replaced the suspension remedy with cancellation of removal, a form of discretionary relief that requires immigrants to meet the very stringent bar of proving not 7 years, but 10 years of continuous presence and establishing that their expulsion would cause exceptional and extremely unusual hardship to a qualifying U.S. spouse or child. This is another place where words matter, because this law doesn't say that immigrants have the right to prove that if they are deported, their families will experience hardship. Of course they would. The law specifically says that they have to prove that their expulsion would cause their spouse or child exceptional and extremely unusual hardship. So the fact that they will miss you and cry and their income is going to go down and the child is going to be traumatized and the spouse is going to be alone, and that's terrible, but that's not exceptional. And that's not extremely unusual. So your request for cancellation of deportation is denied. Get out. Do you understand? Hardship to immigrant applicants themselves was eliminated in this law and was no longer relevant. So, of course, the number of deportations that were canceled plummeted. But then on top of that, to make sure that there would not be a whole lot of these deportation cancellations, the law also capped the number of cancellation grants that they would even accept to 3,000 per year. Those who didn't qualify were barred from seeking lawful admission to the U.S. for either 3 or 10 years, depending on how long they had been illegally in the country. So if you met the requirement, this is wild to me. Bill Clinton's laws, the laws he signed, the main immigration law from the Republicans that he signed into law, and then the other law that they decided that if you lived in the unit, you had to prove that you lived in the United States, not just 7 years now, but 10 years, never committed a crime. And you have to prove that if you are deported, some horrific, extra awful, extra, just like the baby is going to explode, like combustion, kind of unusually extreme hardship type of stuff. And to ensure that most people who applied, even people who met all of those requirements, couldn't actually have their deportation canceled. The law said we're only even going to look at 3,000 of these cases. And if we decide against you, if you've been in the United States illegally for 10 years, then you will be barred from entering the United States for 10 years. That is evil. I don't know how else y'all. Even more importantly, as if it could, when you think it can't get any worse. Expedited removal didn't come from Trump. Expedited removal came from these laws signed by Slick Willie. The IRA instituted the dreaded process of expedited removal. Didn't exist before. Under the program, immigration agents were empowered to expel immigrants without even bringing them before an immigration judge for a hearing if they could not show that they had been in the country for 2 years. So, when people say that they don't want illegal immigrants to have an ID, it goes back to this law. Because how else do you prove that you have been illegal, or how else do you prove that you have been in this country for any period of time? You have an identification with your address on it. And it shows, In practice, until Trump, expedited removals without hearings were largely reserved for immigrants apprehended within 100 miles of the border within 14 days of entry. Others were caught and released. I hate that term so much because it sounds like it sounds like animals, because that's exactly how they intend to treat these people. Into the community pending their hearings. Trump's executive orders, this was back in 2017, vowed to end catch and release and apply the tools of expedited removal nationwide to the letter of the Clinton era law to anyone who crosses the border within the previous 2 years. The border fence, yep. Far from being outliers, Trump's promises on the border fence and his promises for mass deportations in his first administration and in this one, not new, because the Clinton era immigration legislations authorized a sharp increase in the number of Border Patrol personnel, which doubled in size between 1996 and the 9/11 attacks and have doubled again. And actually, again, this article was from 2017. There are even more of them now since 9/11. Using local police to help ICE round up people, a part of this legislation, true. In addition to beefing up the Border Patrol and ICE, Trump's executive orders back in 2017 called for a rapid expansion of the 287G program, named after a provision of federal law aimed at deputizing local and state police agencies to serve as quasi-immigration agents in the apprehension of undocumented immigrants. His executive orders also threatened crackdowns on so-called sanctuary cities that refuse to partner with immigration authorities, but by denying such jurisdictions federal grants and funding. Guess where the 287G program comes from? A provision in the Clinton era immigration legislation. Trump is he was in 2017 and he is still doing it right now, literally telling you, I am going to do this better than Bill Clinton. He's just not saying the words. Meanwhile, Democrats are on Twitter and whatnot talking about how inept and incompetent Trump is at deporting people. Because Democrats are on Twitter celebrating the number of people Biden and Clinton has deported. And they talking about, oh, look, he's not good at anything. He can't even deport people as well as what the fuck? And y'all people are sitting here talking about you leftists and your purity tests? What kind of test do y'all have? Clearly, y'all don't have any kind of test. You have no standards. You have no standards for anything when it comes to politics. Because but let me keep going. Refugee violations, not new. There's nothing in the legislation signed by Clinton that it looks anything like Trump's Muslim ban, which he has not actually been able to carry out because they were overturned in the courts. Clinton did, however, take executive actions, to suspend entry into the United States. People were rightfully upset when Trump said, look, the Chinese and the Muslims can't come in this country because the Chinese got the virus and the Muslims got explodey things. I'm trying not to get the channel in more trouble. Yeah, okay, Trump said that. But Clinton took executive actions. He issued executive orders to suspend entry into the U.S. of people from Zaire, Nigeria, Bosnia, Serbia, Sudan, Angola, and Sierra Leone. I'm going to leave it up to y'all to look up why he targeted those people. Both George W. Bush and Barack Obama did the same thing. So y'all Bama's talking about Trump and his Muslim ban. Trump is a bigot. At least the Democrats aren't bigoted like Trump. Yeah? Oh, yeah? Ask the Nigerians who couldn't fly into the United States under Clinton. Ask the Haitians. Yeah. Let's continue. The southern border wall. In 1990, a 14-mile triple fence was constructed in San Diego. Trump was not president then. In 1996, the IRA authorized the federal government to build additional barriers. In 2006, the Secure Fence Act was passed, authorizing completion of still more. Today, there are 700 miles of fencing along the southern border. Trump didn't put that fence there. Democrats in their legislation did, and Republicans have been going along with it, and Democrats have been going along with it. You do know that Biden actually ignored like dozens of environmental impact studies in order to bypass them to approve building another section of the wall. He did it in his administration. Look it up. Look it up. Among those voting in favor of the Secure Fence Act was, I am so glad to get to this point, Hillary fucking Clinton, then the junior Democratic senator from New York. Among those voting against, I give him credit where he's due, Bernie Sanders, then a member of the House of Representatives from Vermont. But we ain't gonna never forgive him for voting for the crime bill because it contained the Protection of Women Act. You're not gonna protect women at the expense of entire communities of working class and poor people. And that's the problem with Bernie Sanders. Anyway, I'm off topic for that one. Okay, sorry. These are aspects of the Clinton era law that I don't expect people to know the deep ins and outs of this law. This is why we have to talk about it. This is why I'm bringing it here to you, because I know you don't know, because I certainly didn't know everything about this stuff. But I knew about it because I remember when it was passed, and I remembered the chaos that ensued in communities, in immigrant communities. And I remember when cities began declaring themselves sanctuary cities, when people would go into churches and the pastors of the churches would lock the doors, and there would be news footage of ICE agents like surrounding churches and banging on doors. And then you had whole communities of people literally living in church basements for years because people were protecting them from democratic immigration legislation and the implementation of them in the states by a whole lot of Democrat mayors. I remember that. So look, I'm not dismissing people's terror at what's going on right now with the same kind of thing. The only difference is I'm not seeing a whole lot of churches stepping up and doing what they did back then, which literally was open their doors to people who were in the crosshairs of this evil legislation, and literally put themselves between those people and the state. And a couple of pastors, I believe, went to jail. And they were glad to go to jail too. And they were like, and I will do it again in the name of the Lord. And I'm like, that's right. That's right. Because that's what you do with your faith. This is why it says in the book, faith without works is dead. Don't tell me how much you love the Lord and you don't give a damn that people are being exploited and hurt, and their rights and their bodies violated. You're not a Christian if you're not standing between the people and the oppression that is crushing them. That's literally our command. As Christians. I don't know what the rest of y'all do, but that's what I know I'm supposed to do. So I don't want to keep having arguments about what Christianity is and because of the white nationalists and fuck them. They are clear on what it is they really believe. I don't know why anybody thinks those people believe in Christianity. you know damn well that the shit they doing is not. And let me just say now that I kind of brought up the whole church thing, I remember something else. A whole lot of churches got co-opted by the state through George W. Bush's, the first, Daddy Bush, through George Bush's faith-based initiatives program. That's another show. Anyway, let's finish up with this Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton stuff. So there's like no single law from this set of legislations that Clinton signed and implemented that did all. It was a bunch of different things. And of course, most people remember Reagan's amnesty law from '86, and that's pretty much why he is focused on for all of the evil that the immigration system is. And again, while Reagan was the fucking devil, that man was the devil. He was the devil. It does not mean that Bill Clinton and the Democrats were not also the fucking devil, because they clearly were. Because this law, these pieces of legislation essentially invented the immigration enforcement apparatus that we are seeing being used today. This bundle of provisions, it didn't actually have a single goal. It addressed certain areas like increasing penalties on people, the whole tough on crime thing. But the way they were used together created what we are seeing today. More people became eligible for deportation. Legal immigrants, including green card holders, could be deported if they were convicted of certain crimes, which again, remember, that list of crimes that made you eligible for deportation was expanded past like serious capital felony offenses to pretty much any damn thing. Which is why when you think about why things like jaywalking are a precursor to stop and frisk, you see how all of this fits in? Do you understand why we are not separated from other groups of oppressed people who are oppressed in ways that are different from the ways that we are oppressed in? Because even though it looks like the ways we are oppressed are different, when you look into the apparatus that facilitates the oppression, what you find 9 times out of 10 is that different groups of people are oppressed in ways that look different using the exact same legal apparatus. So if you don't think you have anything to do or anything in common with immigrants who came here illegally, look at how those people are rounded up and look at the reasons why. Oh, because they committed a crime, and the crime could be jaywalking. And then you have people on Twitter talking about, oh, I'm an American citizen. Black people on Twitter. I'm an American citizen. I have an ID. They'll see that I'm an American citizen and I won't be in jail at all. Oh, yeah, tell that to Khalif Browder. That's right, you can't. Because he's dead. Died in custody. Rikers Island. Oh, I'm sorry. No, he committed suicide after being wrongfully, because he didn't fucking commit a crime. And even if he did what they said he did, which was shoplifting, they sent that child to Rikers Island, abused him, emotionally, psychologically traumatized him to the point where the experience, the torture, drove him to take his life. How the fuck different are we treated from the way those immigrants are treated today, being rounded up by ICE because they're in the wrong place at the wrong time, because they're not documented? Because how is anybody going to be illegal on land that's stolen from the original inhabitants who are also being rounded up in this shit? And somehow we got Black folks thinking we don't have anything to do with those people. Lord have mercy. Oh, let me go on so I can wrap up. More people became eligible for deportation, even green card holders if they were convicted of a crime. But in 96, Congress radically expanded which crimes made an immigrant eligible for deportation. And they made these changes retro. Ooh, I cannot sweat the hatred of these people out. Oh my God. Overnight, says law professor Nancy Moravec of New York, people who had formed their lives here, came here legally or had adjusted to legal status, were working here, building their families, had ordinary lives in which they were on the PTA and everything else, suddenly, because of some conviction, weren't even allowed to go in front of a judge anymore. They were just fast-tracked to deportation. So it got easier to deport people. Immigrants convicted of crimes weren't the only ones stripped of the ability to argue their case before a judge before getting deported. So did anyone apprehended within 100 miles of the border. And the law required the government to hold more immigrants in detention before deporting them, making it substantially harder for them to get lawyers. These changes drastically reduced the amount of leeway that immigration judges and the executive branch had to exercise discretion in whether or not to deport someone. The change to the law was so drastic that after a high-profile deportation of an immigrant over a minor crime led to public outcry, there was a time in this country when the government did some fuck shit and the people were like, oh, that's fuck shit, nigga. Not so much anymore. Republican members of Congress, including the lead author of the immigration legislation, Ira, wrote the Clinton administration that signed it into law, asking them to back down. The Republican who wrote the legislation was like, damn, I did not mean for you to do that shit. Jesus. And the Clinton administration said, nah, cat's out of the bag now, nigga. Oh, boy. So this meant that it got a lot harder for undocumented people to get legal. For much of the 20th century, it was possible for at least some unauthorized immigrants to obtain legal status once they'd been in the U.S. for an amount of time. We talked about that a little earlier. We talked about cancellation of removal. Marrying a U.S. citizen or permanent resident used to make you eligible to apply for a green card. So did having an immediate relative who's a U.S. citizen, like a child, as long as the citizen's over 18. These were true whether or not you already lived in the U.S. And before Ira, it was true regardless of whether or not you were legal to begin with. After that law was passed, though, an unauthorized immigrant could not directly apply for legal status, even if they had married a U.S. citizen or if they were qualified for a green card through a relative. Immigrants were banished for at least 3 years if they'd lived in the U.S. without papers for 6 months. Banishment lasted 10 years if the immigrant had lived in the U.S. without papers for a year or more. You could waive these bars if you could show that your spouse or child would suffer, again, extreme hardship. Not just that they would be sad and they would have economic problems and they would miss you and they would traumatize the children. And no, it had to be extreme, unusual hardship. But you had to leave the country to do it. So you had to impose the hardship on your family that you were arguing that if the government removed you from your family, that would be an extreme hardship in order to argue. So that triggered the ban before you found out if you gotten the waiver. So a lot of immigrants just left. Or they stayed in hiding. They did one of two things. They left or they went underground because it wasn't worth the risk to try to do it the right way, because the right way was evil as fuck. And it was literally designed to kick as many people out of this country as they could, as many brown people out of this, as many working class and poor brown and black people, because they won't kicking out the Swedish au pairs. They won't kicking out the little French students from Paris who overstayed their work visa when they were working as an au pair for a rich couple during the summer. Ain't nobody chased them mugs down. The law laid the framework for the spikes in deportation, along with typical U.S. imperialist policy of interfering in other people's countries, destabilizing their governments, carrying out coups, imposing sanctions, which increase poverty and cause daily hardship, literally kills people. 40,000 people estimated dead in Venezuela alone because of U.S. sanctions. Right? So aside from the typical, what you would think would happen, people fleeing that kind of thing, this legislation actually created the spikes in deportation. Because deportation after this law was passed went from a pretty rare phenomenon to very common. Before 1996, internal enforcement activities had not played a very significant role in immigration enforcement. There were not ICE raids before this legislation. There were not INS raids. It wasn't something that happened a lot. If it happened, it was so rare. It was literally like the reporter in the news, INS raided, this address because of reports of, someone who committed some heinous crime. That's when you heard about, INS deportations or INS raids. But after this law, these deportation raids and activities rose to the levels that no one had seen since the deportation campaigns of the Great Depression. I bet you don't know nothing about that. And just in case you don't believe what I'm talking about, just in case you don't believe me, I like charts. Love them. Here you go. This is a figure from the article, and this is actually another article that I'm going to give you the link to as soon as I find it. But this is an actual figure that charts the number of Mexicans deported from the United States since 1965. Look at that. Almost nobody in 1965. A few people through the 70s. But in 1996, now this was let's say this was during the Reagan era and the impacts of Reagan's amnesty law, which was bullshit, right? You see deportations increasing a bit. Immigration Reform and Control Act, this was during Reagan. So then this marker is for 9/11, the Patriot Act. This is the 96 Act, this line right here. These are the 96 Clinton era legislations on immigration. And look at the numbers. Trump's fault? What's going on now is Trump's fault? Oh, yeah? Who was doing this in 90, 96, 97, 98, 99, 2001, 2005? How about here? How about right here? What year is that? Okay. So these laws were passed when Congress and the Clinton administration were actively working to increase the amount of money they wanted to spend on agents and on the U.S.-Mexico border. They wanted justification to allocate that money. So they did this. And Clinton wanted to give his friends in the private prison industry their cut of the pie because he was friends with them when they were governor. When he was governor and he and his wife were living in the governor's mansion down in Arkansas, and everybody who worked in the governor's mansion in Arkansas was Black convicted people who had been in prison, who were in prison down in Arkansas, and they were on death row, a lot of them people, and they were forced to work in the governor's mansion for free like slaves. That's why he passed these laws. He was doling out government money to his friends in the private prison industry. He and his wife are racist fucking pigs, and we've been telling you those motherfuckers are racist pigs since they emerged from under the rock in Arkansas that they lived in under. Hell, black folks in Arkansas, as soon as that man ran for president, people are like, y'all don't know nothing about this nigga right here, showing pictures of him standing in front when he introduced. Remember the press conference he had introducing the 94 crime bill? What was the picture? What was it? Do you remember the image? He did that press conference in front of a platoon of black incarcerated men. And every time we said that nigga was a racist piece of shit, and every time we said his wife is a racist piece of shit, and both of them could go to hell, what did y'all so-called progressives and you Democrat supporters say? Oh, how can you say that about them? Toni Morrison said he's the first black president. He played the saxophone on Arsenio Hall. Y'all were bought off by some bad saxophone playing and Toni Morrison losing her mind for a moment. Oh my God. So after 9/11, in particular, with this framework in place, the way the federal government handled immigration changed again. It is like the never resting, metastasizing monster. So immigration, the way the government changed immigration after 9/11 in two major ways. The bureaucracy was reorganized. Do y'all know that the Department of Homeland Security actually didn't exist before 9/11? You don't know that? Oh, I got to find this article that came from the Washington Post several, I know, more than 10 years ago, about the emergence of the Department of Homeland Security and the proliferation of top secret clearances, the number of people in the U.S. government who have top secret clearances that proliferated to a number. I don't even know if they know how many people have top secret clearances anymore. That was supposed to be a very rare thing. And the bureaucracy in the government worsened, deepened. Like the federal government has always been a black hole. They've always had a black budget with the intelligence agencies. But baby, let me tell you, when the Department of Homeland Security was created, that black hole was planet-sized. And then that was the takeaway from that. I'm going to find that article for y'all. And I'm going to make sure to get this article for you all on this immigration thing. So after that, the funding for immigration enforcement, that little bit of money that Clinton wanted for his friends when he passed this bill, the amount of money this government allocates to this, it's criminal. It is criminal. So the combination of this gave rise to what people have described as a formidable machinery for immigrant deportations, a machinery that took the U.S. from deporting 70,000 immigrants in 1996 to 400,000 a year. How? Through the first term of the Obama administration. How many is that? But that machine was built on the legal precedent of these legislations that were passed by and promoted by Bill Clinton. So even at the immigration problem got worse because of these laws, and that was the intention, because you have to have a reason to allocate more money to a problem. If there's no problem, nobody's going to agree to allocate more money to a problem that doesn't exist. So you have to create the problem. And that's what this legislation did. And that is what Democrats and Republicans have been doing this whole time. Now, this wasn't the only reason unauthorized immigrants started settling in the U.S. around this time. Just avoiding this quagmire, getting caught up in this quagmire that IRA created, and not wanting to deal with this mechanism. That's not why people went underground. No. Another reason people started settling in the U.S. around this time was because of the type of jobs available for unauthorized workers that was changing. Because seasonal agricultural jobs, which is what a lot of people immigrated from Mexico to the U.S. and the global South countries to the U.S. for, they would come seasonally, and they were in it, and that was a legacy of something called the, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, maquilladora program that the United States government absolutely had. Yep, we're going to talk about that one day too, because it is also a fucked up program. But good God, it wasn't as fucked up as this. But anyway, the seasonal agricultural jobs that people would come to the U.S. for through the maquilladora program, they began being replaced by year-round service industry jobs. Does anybody know what I'm talking about right there? It's another 4-letter word acronym for another piece of legislation that had to do with jobs. I'm going to give you a minute to think about it while I take another little sip of my mead, because it's delicious. What is the other legislation that was passed right around this time? Right around the time we're talking about? Nope, not DACA. Close. Nope, you come. There it is. Oh, woo! I'm so excited. I have been telling you for years that I was involved in the passage of NAFTA because I worked for the lobbyist who helped draft that legislation. The lobbyist who was a fucking Republican, by the way. And she was a racist pig. Uh-huh. Oh, sorry, 5 letters. Look, I'm drinking. Y'all expect me to count and remember the history too? Damn it. No, I will not put the wine down. Okay, 5 letters. Sorry. But NAFTA also created a huge issue with not just immigration, but also with the economy in Mexico. And we're going to have to get into that on another show, because the way all of this legislation, IRA, the Death Penalty Act, the Crime Bill, the Welfare Reform Act, and NAFTA, the way they all work together to create the foundation, the literal infrastructure for anti-worker attacks, for attacks on immigrants, for mass incarceration, for attacks and continued deprivation of the working class and poor. All of that legislation created the infrastructure for today. And some other stuff. I can't believe people have not paid any attention to the impact of the 1996 Telecommunications Act. How do we not understand that the reason you are so deeply indoctrinated by corporate media today is because Bill Clinton created the foundation for the infrastructure for you to be indoctrinated, because independent media does not exist in the corporate level. Media monopolization was enshrined into law by Bill Clinton. We're going to talk about that too. We have to, because I really do not want people to keep laying all of this at the feet of Donald Trump. And it is not because I am supporting Donald Trump. It is not because I like Donald Trump. It is not because I'm trying to give him an out. I'm absolutely not. I am simply saying that if we're really serious about stopping any of this, we have to be serious about who started it. Because if you do not cut the head of the snake off, boy. So I do this. I love going down these rabbit holes. I love talking about the history of what got us here, because I understand if we don't get this history right, all we're going to do is keep this infrastructure in place, keep voting for the people who are propping this infrastructure up still, and they will continue to do these things. Sure, yeah, you need to get rid of Trump. Yes, great, fine. What you going to do when the next Democrat is elected and they continue the ICE raids and the deportations and the separation of kids in cages, and they continue using slave labor from incarcerated people to fight wildfires, while they're letting one family control all of the water so that working class and poor people, they don't have the availability of a fire department that has enough water to put out the fires that are burning their houses, because the rich white couple up on the hill controls all the damn water and they're using it to soak their house. And meanwhile, you are thinking, some of you Black folks who are nativists, just like these right-wing white Christian nationalists, here you are thinking that aligning yourself with them, making yourself American, is going to protect you from this shit. And history tells us that nobody is safe from it. None of us are safe from what these people have done. None of us, except for their friends, of course. And that's only until, their friends piss them off, in the case of Trump. Oh my God. Thank you for this. Ooh, see, this is why I love y'all. And I'm gonna get off because I know Kim is on. I don't want to cut into her time too much. But the day NAFTA was signed and implemented, the Zapatistas fired their first shots at neoliberalism and the corrupt Mexican government. Because we're going to talk about what NAFTA did to not just U.S. manufacturing and employment, working class and poor people, but we are also going to talk about what it did to Mexico. And here's a hint. NAFTA, the 5-letter word to, yes, I'm sorry, I forgot. Tired and I'm drinking. And I'm preparing for an all-day meeting on Sunday for the Citywide Alliance. So we got a lot of planning to do. There's a lot going on in here. NAFTA, what NAFTA did to Mexico is also what the U.S. government did to Haiti in regard to the people's ability to feed themselves with their own resources. It's what the U.S. government did to countries in the Americas through Operation Condor. Yeah. NAFTA was a huge deal for many more reasons than we understand. And this is why Democrats don't talk about it. This is why you will never hear Democrats talk about IRA, and Bill Clinton's death penalty act. This is why they don't talk about his welfare reform. Because when those SNAP benefits were cut, the COVID extension SNAP, and Biden and the Democrats didn't fight for it. And people were like, y'all are no better than your predecessors with welfare reform. What were Democrats? Hoping that nobody brought to everyone's attention that welfare reform, welfare, the social safety net that doesn't exist because of Bill Clinton. Not because Republicans are uniquely evil, but because Democrats are uniquely duplicitous. They're liars. Liberals facilitate fascism in this way. I will end saying that. What I am talking about tonight and what I'm going to talk about next week and probably the week after that, since we're going down the Clinton rabbit hole, what we're really talking about is the facilitation of liberal fascism and how it has grown in this country, where it came from, who implemented it. We're going to talk about the Democratic Leadership Committee or Council or whatever they would call Al Gore and what's his name? I can't remember his first name now. Rahm Emanuel advising Bill Clinton. That's the thing I forgot to tell you. Rahm Emanuel was advising Bill Clinton on this immigration legislation. I did not know that Rahm Emanuel was involved in presidential politics that long. That motherfucker has been around this long, and he was rewarded for his loyalty by Obama. Thank you, David Fromm. David Fromm. Thank you, Erica. And people are not talking about these people who have been around all this time fucking us over. And y'all talking about Trump. But the very people who created the infrastructure for Trump to do what he's doing, you got shit to say about. And we have been trying to tell you these people are our enemies all this time. Whew, I hope you understand how exasperated we leftists are. But it is our revolutionary optimism that keeps us in this struggle and in these conversations. So this will not be the last conversation on the Clinton years and the lasting impacts of the Clinton years on what we are experiencing today, so that those who are watching and listening, if y'all are really serious about doing something about what's going on here, you will have the information you need to understand who your enemy is. And your enemy is not just Trump. It is not just the Republicans. Your enemy are the fucking Democrats too. Malcolm was right. Keep being political chumps and keep voting for these people while they keep snatching your rights away, while they keep killing you, while they keep denying you a way to make a living and sustain yourself, because they got a jail cell. Once you become redundant, when you lose your job and you can't get another one and you lost your house and you're facing desperate, they got a jail cell for you that they will make money off of. You will be useful to their pockets in some way until you die. That's the system they have set up for us here. This is not democracy. This is liberal fascism that has facilitated conservative fascism. It's the same goddamn thing. They're all fascists. And if you keep voting for them, so are you. So that's all I got for this week. Thanks a lot for watching Darker Than Blue and The Dark Room. Appreciate you very much. I'll see you next week where, yes, we will continue this conversation about the Clinton years and why they still making us itch. Peace, y'all.